Welcome, welcome. It's Bruce Show with Unscrew the News. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're watching this, make sure to share this out and get some more eyeballs. As I always say, we have got another exciting show. I've got a returning guest, Dr. Judith Curry, Dr. Judith Curry is joining me. I'm so excited to have her, as our last conversation was quite interesting. I love talking to her. She has a lot of insight, and I find very commonsensical. So it's wonderful to have her back. We're going to get into it here right away. It's Judith Curry, and she is at the Climate Forecast Applications Network. And she has, let me see, her background is faculty positions at the University of Colorado, Penn State University, Purdue, before joining Georgia Tech, chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Institute of Technology, and retired as a professor emeritus in 2017, citing concerns about politicized bias in climate science. And that's where she became famous. And we're happy to have her. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Judith Curry. It's a pleasure to have you again.
Oh, well, thanks for inviting me back.
Well, thanks for making the time. I know that we're having a little bit of schedule issues, but I'm really grateful to have you and to be able to ask you some of these hard questions, that sometimes our politicians really aren't addressing, and they're not taking into account, I think, what a lot of the citizens like myself and other people that are questioning their motives really are. So I know that you've pushed back before, and that's why you are on that famous side of things, because of pushing back against, I think it was just after Katrina, to remind our audience. Do you mind just giving a brief? It was a reminder of what happened after Katrina.
Oh, well, we had published a paper looking at the global intensity of hurricanes, and we found that the percent of category 4 and 5 hurricanes had increased over the past 35 years. And so, and this was published 2 weeks after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. And so this immediately Hurricane Katrina became a big focusing issue for the global warming movement. And
Right.
we were adopted and courted by the alarmist movement. But then, we felt like we were being used, and I started looking more closely at what some of our critics were saying, and some of it was valid. And so I, began questioning, what the climate establishment was really up to.
Right.
And that came to a head in 2009 with the unauthorized release of the so-called Climategate emails, which showed all sorts of skullduggery being done by the so-called climate establishment, the people writing the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports, and so forth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I'm grateful for you. A lot of my guests, end up falling into your category of the, hey, something doesn't look right, and I'm going to call it out. But now that gets you into a heap of hot water with the establishment, and then they end up trying to ruin you, and that's essentially what they tried to do with you, was to ruin your career, ruin your, I guess, good name, and really call out your theories and your science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate you being here again. And I had some questions kind of pointed towards Alberta and our, I guess, where we sit in regard to utilizing our resources. And you touched on that in the last time that we talked about it. Obviously, it's a big deal for us because we sit on, I think it's the second largest cache of oil and gas in the reserve in the world, and there's a lot of maybe it's those those outside agencies and outside powers that be that really want us to keep it in the ground, and obviously keeping it in the ground keeps us from being successful and prosperous and having that power structure. Anyway, I'm going to ask you some of these questions because that's actually what we're facing a lot of today, and we're in the process of working out a better deal with Ottawa. The better deal, it ranges everything from having a much better deal with our head office per se over in Ottawa, or right to the other end of the spectrum, being a completely separate nation, which we're also somewhere in between there. Hopefully, we're going to land. But my questions, like I said, are framed around our resources. And one of the questions that I have here for you is: in May, Ottawa and Alberta signed a deal. And if you don't understand it, because it's outside of your scope, because it's obviously about Canadian politics, if it's outside of your scope, no big deal. In May, Ottawa and Alberta signed a deal up to $600 million toward each towards carbon capture between 2030 and 2040, with Alberta's industrial carbon price climbing to $130 a ton by 2040. You do climate risk for energy clients. Would you put our money into that? Or
No,
put your own money into that?
I think carbon capture and storage, it's worth developing the technologies and putting them in your back pocket in case you ever need them. But it's actually not a very good solution. It's not going to change the climate in any way. I mean, it'll help bureaucrats check a box or something like that, but it's not going to change the climate. And it's actually a sunk that there's no ancillary benefits to it. It's just a sunk cost that's really not going to accomplish anything. So I'm not a fan of, natural carbon storage with wetlands and things like that, and farming practices and soil tilling and things like that. Planting trees, I think, is a good one. But, the kind of big engineered carbon capture and storage, I think, is not going to be very effective. There's unintended environmental consequences that would presumably emerge if this was done at large scale. It's very expensive and it's not really going to accomplish anything. So I'm not a fan.
Okay, well, I think that we're on the right track. I mean, I know that Alberta is trying to check that box off, or our UCP government is. But I'm a fan of your answer to that for sure. Okay, question number 2 is Canada's emissions cap sets the first compliance period between 2030 and 2032, roughly 27% below our 2026 attributed emissions. Give me the number. What does that do to global temperature by 2100? Any idea?
Pretty much nothing. Even if you believe the global climate models, these small reductions by an individual country is just basically a drop in the bucket. It's not going to. An estimate was made that if the U.S. met its net zero objectives by 2050, it would reduce planetary warming by a few hundredths of a degree.
Right.
And I assume the numbers for Canada would be even smaller.
Right, because I mean, first of all, it's been shown a number of times, and maybe you know this better than I do, but the amount of forested areas that we have, which is really carbon capture, is that we're already in a net zero. We're already in a net zero position as far as our country is concerned compared to our emissions. Sorry, I'm just throwing this question out at you. Do you know anything about that, or do you have any thoughts on
Sure.
on
Well,
that?
yeah. I mean, Canada's forests uptake a lot of carbon, and this whole thing is based on climate model simulations that are highly uncertain.
Hmm.
And, just a lot of arbitrary numbers, arbitrary deadlines that people have carved into stone is something that we have to do. And it just, if you look at the actual impact of all this on, planetary temperatures, it'd be pretty small. And, if everybody globally met their net zero targets, there would, if you believe the climate models, we would not warm as rapidly as otherwise. But that requires that you, A, have confidence in the global climate models, and B, all the developing countries and China and India and everybody also meets net zero. So those are two things that, are pretty iffy.
Yeah, 100%. Can I just ask you a question about the carbon capture model that in my first question?
Mhm.
To you and your, this is just obviously your opinion, but d- does it feel more like just some sort of hocus pocus that someone's trying to, it's more of the greenwash? To me, that's what it feels like, is that they're creating this industry, and then we're gonna build all this carbon capture, and someone's going to get rich in the process, but it's
Well,
really not going to accomplish anything.
well, carbon capture and storage, the environmental activists, they are not a fan. They understand that there will be unintended consequences of doing this to the environment. And they also don't want to let the petroleum companies off the hook.
Right.
So,
Okay. So
so,
this
so the
is
people
this is
pushing
allowing
this,
the petroleum companies off the hook, is what you're saying. So
yeah, and so the
I see. Yeah.
environmental activists don't like it. It's just something cooked up by the politicians and the oil companies who, would really like to see business as usual, but are trying to come up with some politically palatable
Right.
thing, to help the situation politically.
I see. Okay. All right. I'm moving on to question 3, which actually addresses what you were getting into. Was Canada is about 1.5% of global emissions. Obviously, a tiny, tiny amount. Is there any version of Canadian climate policy that measurably changes the climate?
Oh yeah, there's nothing that Canada can do to. Actually, if Canada cut down its whole boreal forest, I think that would change the carbon balance and change the planetary albedo. That would be something
Hmm. Or
substantial that it would probably change it for the worse. You don't want to mess with Mother Nature. But actually, there was even one plan to cut down all the trees, because if that was allowed to be snow, the snow would reflect more sunlight and cool things off up there. But it's just something that makes absolutely no sense. Absolutely no sense.
absolutely no sense whatsoever. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Okay, so what about burning all the trees down? Because that seems like another plan that they're pushing forward, is this forest fire, and we're not going to even worry about making sure that they're put out. Instead of putting money towards hiring water bombers and teams that put out the
Well,
fires, they just
okay.
let it burn.
Well, all the carbon, in the trees, then if it's burned, it goes into the atmosphere rapidly. So you
Right.
haven't really saved anything. But it does help you if that whole region then becomes snow covered, and then it helps you with the
With the cooling.
reduce the amount of solar radiation coming in. But trees are a good thing. Canada should work to keep its trees healthy and to manage its forests, in a sensible way.
Right.
Um, so it's a plan that again would have all sorts of unintended consequences.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay. Separate the two questions for me. What would reduce Canada's emissions versus what would actually reduce Canada's risks from weather? Are they the same list? Are those the same list?
Okay. Well, Canada's risks from extreme weather have nothing to do with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They have to do with natural climate variability. And, if you get, and forest fires seem to be the big risk due, for the last several years, where we've felt plenty of that in the U.S. from the smoke that gets blown into the U.S. from Canada.
Right.
So better forest management is important, and the ability to actually fight the fires in certain regions. I mean, some of them you just want to let burn, but just part of the natural cycle. But if it's too
Sure.
close to something that's valuable, you want to be able to fight it. But yeah, I think fires are a big problem for Canada. But warming overall is going to support Canadian agriculture. I mean, most
Yes.
of Canada is too cold. People don't live up there. So, Canada is one of the places that would benefit, in my opinion, from a warming climate. I mean, there's no place in
Yeah.
Canada where it's unbearably hot. I mean, cold is a bigger problem, and it's why a big part of your country is essentially uninhabited.
Yes.
So I think warming is overall beneficial for Canada and would be beneficial for its agriculture
Amen to that. Okay.
and
Uh,
tourism. Yeah.
and tourism, yeah, absolutely. Okay, Alberta's grid runs, and this goes to your question, or your point about it being so cold. Alberta's grid runs through weeks of -35, which is very cold to you. It's probably about the same temperature Fahrenheit as well. When you look at net zero electricity mandates in cold weather jurisdiction, what's the failure mode nobody's pricing?
Oh, it's pretty bad. We've run up against it. This year it was, I guess, New Jersey, was having big problems. And New York,
Yeah.
they've decommissioned their nuclear power plants and relying on alternative energy and gas, and they've decommissioned their coal power plants. And you can't get enough gas there, or the gas pipes freeze. Their gas pipelines are not as hardened in the US as they are in Canada. Canada's are really hardened for the cold. But like in Texas, and this was maybe 3 years ago, there was a really big cold event, and the natural gas pipe, all the natural gas infrastructure was frozen. And they came very close to being in very big trouble. But they managed to manage the grid in time. And Texas is very challenging because they have high penetration of renewables. Of course, it was the middle of winter and the wind wasn't blowing, so they didn't have much support from the
Right.
renewables. And then the gas froze, and then it's really bad. One of the big, because we don't have a hardened gas infrastructure, the U.S. relies on coal power plants during, really peak demand periods like cold outbreaks, and coal that can be stored on site, and you don't have the same problems that you do with gas pipelines. So so the environmentalists say, oh, coal is absolutely the worst. Well, let's get rid of the coal. Well, you can't get rid of the coal unless you harden the natural gas infrastructure. So people are, looking for shortcuts, and then they're caught short, when you need electricity the most during these extreme cold events or a heat wave.
Yeah, I
So,
remember that Texas event really well.
yeah.
It was pretty shocking to see. All right,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and part of the problem during these events is not just having it's how to manage is how to manage the grid and
Right.
during these events. And when you have a lot of renewable energy in the mix that's intermittent or it's failing or something, that makes managing the grid much more challenging. So it just makes the whole situation worse.
hmm it certainly looked like it did in Texas. That's for sure.
Yeah.
You sell forecasts to insurers. When an insurer raises premiums in Alberta, what are they actually pricing? A climate signal, or the fact that we built more expensive things in more exposed places?
Well, the thing about insurance companies charging more because of global warming, I'm really not seeing much of that. I can't speak for sure of what's going on in Canada, but at least in the companies that I deal with, they look ahead 5 years, and they're looking at weather risk, on time scales of, the year ahead. And they
Right.
look at, whether it's going to be an El Nino year. Um, right now I have clients who want to know, well, we're going to be El Nino next, are we going to be El Nino next spring? What is that going to mean for tornadoes, and which regions should we watch out for? And that's the kind of question they're asking right now. So I think it's probably because you're building more in high risk areas. And I think the fire situation
Right.
in Canada is probably what's behind rising insurance rates. I mean, until Canada figures out how to manage its forests better and reduce, the big loss and the big conflagrations that threaten property, I mean, your insurance rates are going to keep going up.
Mm.
And what happened in California, their insurance rates just going so high. And in 22 years ago, a lot of, they raised, the insurance company raised it a lot in near Los Angeles. And a lot of people didn't buy insurance. And of course, and they had the big
Palisades
fires.
fire. Yeah.
Yeah, the very big fires. And a lot of people were caught without insurance. And the state was, the state was saying you can't raise insurance, by this amount. And so the insurers were pulling out, and there were all sorts of people who just weren't insured.
Right.
So, you can't have it both ways. You can't, and it's fire, I think, is probably the biggest insurance problem for Canada, as far as I can tell.
Mm. Well, we used to be able to manage our fires. I've had a number of discussions with forest fire specialists, that says that we used to have all of these things in place. I think I can't think that it's not on purpose, because these are like insurance policies having high technical teams, water bombers, and that sort of thing. I mean, it's not like it's new for us to have forest fires, so it's a tricky situation here for sure.
Well, I think there's been this, people just, when they start blaming the fires on global warming, they throw up their hands and say, oh, there's
Right.
nothing we can do. No, that's not the case. It sort of gives them an out from really investing and figuring out how to manage this situation.
Oh, you're right about that. Absolutely. All right. Second last question here. Jasper burned in 2024, so 2 years ago. Parks Canada and the Canadian Forest Service have since conceded fuel load management failures. Alberta had already cut the RAPTAC. I guess that's what we were just talking about. RAPTAC rappel program and the lockout towers. Our new water bombers arrive in 2031, which is, I guess, 5 years away. In your professional judgment, how much of Canadian wildfire loss is a climate story, and how much is a management story? Maybe we already addressed that. Yeah.
Well, natural climate variability is involved. There's a big difference between El Nino and La Nina years, for example. And there are certain multi-decadal regimes where it's going to be, better or worse for Canada. So there is a climate component. The human caused global warming component, I would say, is negligible to non-existent.
Right.
But it's really the management part. I mean, that's the part that you can impact. I mean, you can't impact the climate piece of it, but you can impact the management piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, we were already addressing that question, but thank you. Rapid attribution studies now put out this heat wave was made X times more likely paper within days of an event. Is that science or is that press release?
Oh, it's press release. There are some scientists who are doing these kind of analyses, and then they, but they're in the UK. There's a leading group, and the name escapes me off the top of my head. but the leader of it is Frederic Otto. Rapid Weather Attribution, I think is the name of the group. And their avowed goal is to put pressure on petroleum companies and oil, fossil fuel companies, and to provide evidence for lawsuits against these companies. So it has a very political motivation. It's voodoo science. It's very, very weakly supported.
Wow. Okay, that was it for my list of questions for you, but I guess I wanted to get a sense from you in regard to I guess generally in regard to, because you and I talked about this before, it was obviously using our resources here in Alberta. There seems to be a lot of pressure for us to keep it in the ground. Obviously, all of these stories, the propaganda that comes out saying, that we're affecting climate. You mentioned it once. You mentioned it the last time that we talked. Is that we are not in a position for renewable resources, and I'm talking widely over the world at this point. But we're not in a position where that's going to replace our oil and gas and nuclear power. Is that still your frame of mind in that regard?
I mean, it's I think there's some upside for solar power, on structures, not big solar farms, and it's certainly not a solution for Canada because you're just too far north. But wind power, I mean, the land use and the resource requirements are huge. The intermittency, these are just not good power sources. I think, at least in the US, where people are trying to build out nuclear power, thinking that's the way forward. And I have to agree that is the way forward. I think natural gas is going to be around for a long time. And at least until the US invests in hardening its natural gas pipelines, we're going to need coal, for peak demand situations. So this demand isn't going away. But if you look ahead to 2100, I would be very surprised if we're still burning oil gas for energy. In 2100. I mean, we will eventually transition away from this as
Right.
better solutions become available, but they're not available now. And the Middle East situation and the blocking of the oil tankers and the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, and the global panic over that situation just emphasize how important oil and gas is to the global economy, and that's just not going away anytime soon.
One last question for you, Dr. Curry, is I guess it was about carbon in general. Carbon's been made out, and we especially feel it here in Alberta, Western Canada, and any oil or resource producing country, is that carbon has been made out to be this evil character that is threatening the world and threatening these catastrophic events, weather events like you've been talking about for many years. In your opinion, is carbon the evil doer, the catalyst for all of these events, or is it just being made out to be this the villain of the story?
Well, carbon, is a big part of life. If you look at biomass, if you look at our own body, there's a ton of carbon here. So, I mean, carbon is, necessary for life. And it's been, and carbon dioxide is greening the planet. The more carbon dioxide, the planet is greener than it was several decades ago.
Right.
In like over 80% of the land surface, something like that. And yeah, it probably does contribute to warming, a certain percentage of the warming that we've seen. I don't know how much that percentage is. But, the argument that warming is dangerous that's really never been made very thoroughly. And I would say that warming is most definitely not dangerous for Canada. You'd probably do better if you were a little bit warmer.
And we'd have more beaches and more sun
Yeah.
tanning and more growing of our own food. Obviously, we have a long period where we can't grow in certain areas of Canada. But I agree. Thank you so much. Judith, it has been a fantastic conversation. I love talking to you, and I love picking your brain on some of these subjects. And I appreciate you and your common sensibility to help Albertans and Canadians move forward.
Okay, well, thank you. I enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you. If you don't mind sticking around just for a couple more seconds, I'm going to say goodbye to the audience, and then I will be right back to you. Okay. Thank you so much for watching. If you are still participating, make sure to share this out. Get some more eyeballs on this information. Great information by Dr. Judith Curry. Oh, you can find her and her work at Climate Forecast Applications Network. I'm going to pull it up here. Sorry for a second here, Judith. I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to see this and they can find you and your work at the Climate Forecast Applications Network. And do you run the Substack anymore, or is that
the blog? No, I am on Twitter at
Okay.
CurryJA. So if you're on Twitter,
we'll
give
find
me
you
a
there.
follow.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you and all the work that you do. And God bless you guys. Let's stay sane together. Keep your head on a swivel. This is Bruce, and I'm out of here. Thank you so much for watching Unscrew the News. I appreciate your participation in freedom in Canada. Share this information and help others.